First of all, we have to understand the NOF, the number of facilities. Let me put some notes over here for you. Okay, so, and then I'm going to write some update method to really add in the facility objects one by one, and then I will write GUnit test, and then we'll trace it together, right? So there are two purposes of NOF attributes. Okay, two purposes. Number one, it records how many facility object addresses have been stored in facilities array so far. So that's the first purpose. Remember, each index for the facilities array is going to store the address of some facility objects, right? So it's simply the NOF over here tells you how many have been stored so far. Initially, of course, 0, but there's got to be some maximum capacity you can store into the array. So that's something we'll speak about. All right, that's number one. And also number two, okay, it kind of indicates the index into facilities array for storing the next facility object's address. I think for purpose number two, this is something that's a little bit more implicit than number one, but they kind of work together. I would say for number two, for now, just read the sentence to make sure I understand what it means in English, right? And then I'll show you exactly how that works at runtime. It'll be easier to explain that when we get there. Okay, but it will simply indicate the index, which means you're going to use NOF somehow as the indexing notation, indexing expression for array facilities. That's something we'll see. All right, and then let's see this. For NOF, we know that it's simply private, so we have to create some public accessor method. So why don't we do that now? Right, but for these two purposes, it's also explained in the written notes for the point collector PDF notes I just showed to you. So you can also see the explanation there, but I will illustrate as well this week. For NOF, let's go down a little bit, pretty much like a get trainer. So I'm just going to put it just right underneath get trainer. Okay, so now you can see public, let's say integer, get number of facilities. Okay, or you can either say get NOF over here. The name is kind of up to you, but I would just want to make it as informative as possible. So I don't want to use any acronym as the method name. So just to make sure everybody can understand it. Get a number of facilities. So what should we do? Well, you got to return the private attributes.nof. All right, so that's number one. I want to do some little extension here, and then we also want to know what. Remember, every time when we create an array, we have to give some initial size, right? I would say typically for the array, the size you give to it must be fixed until it gets fully occupied. Then you may want to consider expanding it. But for this course, we don't necessarily have to expand the array so often unless you're explicitly told. But for now, let's make some assumption. Okay, let's say the assumption we are making is, let's say for every member in the fitness club, they can actually book up to, let's say, 6 facilities for any day or for any time period. And then once it gets full, they have to wait until one of the facilities either cancelled or maybe the facility is simply expired, so they can do another one. Let's say, very we're just simulating the real life scenario. Let's say we're gonna specify this constraint. We can use constants. Remember how to do constant in Java? You have to use the final keyword. So we say private final. And typically for defining the name for name constants, you have to use Java developer usually use all capitals. So you can say maximum number of facilities. And as I said, let's make it 6. Okay, it's arbitrary, but for your particular application, you have to see what the requirements are, and you will work it out accordingly. For now, let me just tell you what the requirement is. It's going to be 6. Okay, private final, I forgot to declare the type, of course. It should be integer. All right. So, sorry, let me go back here. and let me document it. And you should really, hopefully now you have really adopted some good practice. You should really try to document your code along the way, rather than saying you simply got 500 lines of code without any comments, and then once you get it to work, you will start documenting them. It's not the way to go. You want to document along the way. So our assumption is each member can book for up to 6 facilities. Okay, so that's kind of the assumption we are making. All right, and then let's now try to do one more thing, and then I will be able to introduce the update method. Okay, how do we initialize the array? Some developers like to actually simply say the facilities will just be maybe assigned to over here to be a new facility, the type of the array, and then over here you can simply put this constant over here. This is some Java developer would like to do. However, I would discourage you to actually do this, because whenever we are declaring attributes in this particular section, you want to restrict every line over here to be declarations only, and you only initialize the attributes inside the constructor. So that's what I would highly recommend you do. Okay, so I would say don't do this over here. Let me copy this, cut this line here, and then do not do the initialization for the array over here. Okay, that's something I want to mention. And instead, we're going to say for every member over here, we actually want to make sure whenever you can see we got so many versions of the constructor over here, right? You can see so many. Okay, we want to make sure calling either of the versions over here. How many versions do we have? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We want to make sure, doesn't matter how other external user, they might call either version 1, version 2, up to version 6. Doesn't matter which version they call, each version should initialize the facilities array properly, right? So I would suggest we're going to define the initialization in one of them, and then we're going to use that as a helper constructor to be called in each one of the other constructor, right? That's basically the idea. And we learned about how you can call helper constructor previously, so we can definitely use it. So I would say typically for this one here, which takes no parameter, we can definitely use it as the default one, right? And then we let every other constructor to always call this by performing some default action. Okay, so I used to say do nothing. So now I can say some default action. Default actions applicable to all other versions of constructor. Right? So all the other versions over here. That's what I meant. Over here, all the other 4 versions over here. And what should be the default action? I would say this is where I try to initialize the facilities array. Facilities is assigned to what I said before, right? So you don't really want to do this initialization. Let me emphasize again. You don't want to do this right after you declare the facilities array over here. That's highly discouraged. So I would suggest always put initialization inside the constructor. It will be better. All right. Okay, and then we can also try to explicitly initialize NOF, right? Remember the first purpose. It actually records how many facility object addresses have been stored. So initially it should be simply 0. So I would say this dot NOF is simply assigned to 0 over here. Yeah, you're right. You might choose not to really put this line explicitly because NOF being an integer will be initialized to be 0 by default anyway. But I would say even that's true. But I would say putting that explicitly will actually help the documentation for your code, right? It wouldn't hurt. So these are the only 2 default actions I would like to have for every other version, for every constructor, right? So now you got 2 options right now. Let me show you the option number 1. Option number 1 is going to result in lots of duplicates, which goes like this. I know that I want to have these 2 lines always for all the other versions. So I can put it simply over here. And then I can put it over here. And then I can put it over here for this version here. I can also put it over here, right? That's something I can do. And for this one here, don't worry, I'm going to get to it, okay? Just conceptually. However, you can see if I do it this way, I got lots of duplication for my code. It's not really recommended, right? So whenever you're having duplicates, you really want to consider using a helper method to really call the helper method instead of repeating the lines of code, right? So what should we do? What we should do is, this is the only place where we put the definition for default actions. Every other place, we can simply call that particular constructor. That's what we can do. So we can say this, like that. So this is calling the constructor performing default actions. All right, so guys, hopefully you're okay. So calling this would be as if we actually copy and pasted these two lines over here instead. However, this is much nicer. Think about what's going to happen. Later on, if we decide to expand the definition for this particular helper constructor, let's say if I add another line over here, if I add another line over here and then pipe something over here, and every usage for this particular helper constructor will be updated accordingly. You don't need to simply put this line and repeat this for so many times for other constructors. So that's the great advantage. Okay, let me just delete it. So that'll be one. Let me just copy this line here, and then I can also replace this line over here by that. Put it over here, and this part here is a little bit interesting. Okay, let me deal with this last. Okay. And then this part here, I can also paste this line, right? So far, so good. So now the problem is Java has the constraint that you can, let me just try this, if I can do it. Okay, it turns out you cannot. I just want to remind myself, okay? So it seems like Java wouldn't allow you to call two helper constructor in a row. You cannot do it. If you, here's a rule. Whenever you want to call a helper constructor, number one, you can only call a single one. And number two, that single call to the helper constructor must be the first line of your method. Okay, so now let me just write it down over here. You can only call a maximum one helper constructor as the first line. Okay, so that's the principle over here. However, I would argue that we don't really need these two lines, and that will still work. So why? Think about what's happening over here. This line over here is basically saying we are calling another constructor member that's with an integer and also character and double, which means this line here would be as if we're calling this version of the constructor over here, right? You can see integer, character, and also double. And that one there will also in turn cause this particular constructor performing the default action. So that will definitely cover that. Okay, let me document it for you, right? Calling the helper constructor below will also in turn cause the other helper constructor performing the default action. Right? Let me just say it again. So calling this line over here is going to call this particular version of the constructor, and then the first line of that is going to call this particular helper constructor again in turn, and that one there is going to call this version of the constructor first, and that one there is going to make sure we perform the default actions appropriately. All right. All right, guys. I think so far we have done the proper initialization for these two attributes over here, right? And of course, this one here. Oh, the only you can think about this is not really an attribute. It's simply a constant. So that's why I can initialize it right away over here. For all other non-final, which means they are variables, you should not initialize them right away over here. So we want to restrict this first part over here just to be declarations only for your attributes. So that's the practice I would like to encourage you to keep. All right. I will now be ready to actually do a mutator for the facility by adding it, right? So what can I do? So let me just go to mutator. Okay. So here we got accessor, right? And let me go to mutator methods over here, right? What I will do now is I'm going to let's say we did register trainer and refer trainer last time, also swap trainer, right? So why don't we do it here? Okay, just continue the code, right? By the way, for the methods, you can feel free to rearrange the order in whatever way you like. But for now, I'll simply just divide it into the sections, which I told you in the very beginning of the previous week. All right, so now what should we do? Let's say this. Add a new facility objects to the end of the facilities array. Okay, that's what we would like to do now for the method. So I'll say public void, and then add. Here, I think I can say add facility, or I can say add. But let's just make it more informative. I can say add facility. And then let me make it simple for the first version. I will introduce another version later. So facility, let's say F. Okay, it's a mutated method, right? It's returning void. And let me show you the code. Only a couple of lines over here. So I would say this dot facilities array at what index. Remember I said before, NOF, the second purpose, it tells you what's the next slot to store the address of the facility objects. So this dot NOF, using that as using its current value as the index, is assigned to F. So this one is going to create aliasing, right? We talked about copying address last week. And then after this, I'm going to update the index for the next object to be stored. So this dot NOF plus plus. All right, so these are the two lines I would need over here. All right, and let me do one more thing, which is to create a JUnit tests to really test what we got so far, and then we'll trace it in both the paper and also debugger. So let me go back to the package explorer over here, and let me create a new test, JUnit test over here. Right click, add new, and then let's call that JUnit test case, test member. Okay, and we should really do JUnit 4, and say finish, and add that into the library path as usual. All right, let's now try this. Okay. And for simplicity, I'm just going to create a member, just one single member, which is with a name. Okay, so I can say, let's say maybe I want to do for, okay, control space, and make sure you import model that member. One thing to note, you only have to put some explicit import statements if you're using a class from another package. If you're only using the class inside the same package, you don't really need an import. That could be some confusion here. So for now, you can see for the package explorer, so you can see test member is inside the JUnit tests package. And we are trying to use the member class from another package called model. That's why we need to import. However, if there's any class you created under the JUnit tests, in that case, you don't need to say import. However, for our separation concern, we always put the model classes under model package. So that's why we need the import statement. All right, let's maximize it. And then let's now create. Let me just make it, let's say, Hyang over here. And then new member. Okay, and then I can use, I remember I should have a constructor version where I can simply pass the name, right? Let me use this version over here, right? So when I use the debugger, I can also show you how it calls the constructor, the helper constructor later. All right, let me go back here. And then, okay, let me just put the name, just say Hyang over here. All right, and then we're going to add in the facility. Let me say I want to add in 3 facility. Let's say facility, control space, so you can see also facilities added in. Let's remind ourselves, what should we pass for facility? If you look at that, we haven't got any constructor and also methods yet, right? Let's do it. So we can do the following. We can say public, actually before that, I should really say over here, private, and private, and private, right? So what about constructor? Let's say, let's just make it easy. We're just going to initialize all the 3 attributes in the constructor, let's say. Okay, so I can say public, and then the same name as a class, right? Facility. Let me maximize it. And then we're going to have string name. So I will deliberately choose the same name as the attribute, so I can use this keyword to really disambiguate. And also double price, and also integer units. So this will be this dot name is assigned to name, right? This dot price is assigned to price, and this dot units is assigned to units. There we go. All right, so everything works. And then, of course, you can define the helper method. You can also define the accessor method for get name, get price, get units, and also change the name, change the price, and change the unit. You can also do it as well. I don't see the need for now, but if I need it later, I'll come back. Okay, for now, I'll just use the constructor. That'll be enough. All right. I think that'll be good. Okay. So now facility, let's say F1 will be new facility. Okay, and then we should give a name. Let's say spinning class. Okay, let's say, and then the second one should be price. I don't know, 2.5 bucks, and also for 1 hour. And then facility F2 will be new facility. And then let's say the gym. And then let's say gym will be, let's say $2, and then let's say for 2 hours. Okay, we already simplified the problem. So for the units, it can only be an integer. It can only do 1 hour, 2 hours. It cannot be 1.5 hours. Finally, facility, let's say F3 will be new facility. Let's say locker. And then let's say locker will be let's say 1.5 bucks for every hour, and then let's say Hyun is going to use it for let's say 3 hours, right? Something like that. All right. So now we're going to add in the facility into this particular members facilities array, right? Before I do that, let me change the order a little bit. Okay, let me put a member over here. Okay, so now we can do some assertion right away. We can say assert equals over here. So if I say Hyun dot get number of facilities, right? Initially it should be just 0. Initially. All right. And then what about next? Let's say Hyun dot add facility, and then let's say F1. And then in that case, we're going to say what will be the assert equals. After adding F1, it will be 1. So you can kind of see the pattern over here. Let me just complete it. F2, F3. Okay, so we're going to say after adding F2, so now we really get F1 and F2, so that should be 2. And after adding F3, it should be 3. Okay, so that's our first test. We don't really check the contents for the array just yet. We'll do that maybe in the next video, but in the later video. Let's now run the JUnit test. So we get a green bar. Okay, so everything works. It's just about make sure we're adding the array properly. So I think I'll stop here about the code development, and then it will be now time for us to really trace the program. Let's do it.